Hi, my name is Ronan Mahan and I'm going to show you how to use Filther for Substance. Filther works the same in Substance Painter, Designer or Alchemist, but in this example I'm going to show you how to use it with Substance Painter. The first thing you want to do is install the filter by pasting the SBSAR file as well as the metadata folder in your Substance Painter shelf effects directory. This is normally in my documents. The metadata folder contains the thumbnail for Filther. The next thing I'm going to do is apply a simple material across the mesh, and I'm going to instance that material across the different texture sets. So now that I've applied my material, I'm going to apply Filther over the top. To do that, come down to your shelf, to Filters, and drag Filther on the top of your layer stack. You'll see now that I start to see the filth effect on my material. Next, I'm going to go through all the parameters of Filther to give you a brief overview of how it works. In order to access the parameters, you need to have Filther selected here. At the top here, you can see which channels Filther is affecting. Next is some attributes, which just gives you some tips on how to use it. You'll see we have some presets, which we'll come back to later. So at the top here, you've got a random seed. If you click this, you'll notice that the filth gets moved around, it gets randomized, the position and the rotation. It doesn't change the type of filth or any of your important settings. It just allows you to get quick variation from your filth by hitting the randomize button. You've got an enable switch, which is just handy for seeing the before and after. This is also useful in Substance Designer where you want to bypass Filther without having to disconnect it from all the nodes around it. Next, you've got some tiling controls, offsets, UVs, rotation, tile safe rotation off so you can break tiling if you want to. We've also got triplanar projection. If you want to change from the UVs that come with the mesh to triplanar projection, you can do that easily here using that. And triplanar projection settings, it comes with all the normal settings for triplanar projection, so the tiling and offsets and rotations that you want to do, as well as the blending contrast. Next up is your colorizing method. This is where you can choose what color the filth should be. So if we choose a dark red, you can see it colorizes the filth. We can choose between single color, 2 color and 3 color blends, as well as no color at all in case you want to do something like water or moisture where you don't want to affect the diffuse. So you can see here if I change to 2 color or 3 color, I start to mix in different colors into the filth. I can also control how these colors are applied. So you can play with the range and the position of where the colors are, so this way you can easily get the color variation that you want. Let's stick with 2 color for now, a dried out color here and an inner red, and let's just change the position of this so we've got kind of like maybe a dried blood look here. Next up are all your important controls for filth. These are the ones that you're going to use most often. So right here is the filter choice. This is how you choose which mask Filther is using to apply the filth across your mesh. So there are 19 different maps for you to choose from here, as well as you can enable the option down here to use a custom filth input. You can use any grayscale image or procedural texture to drive the mask that's being used in Filther. You can choose your type of filth here. You've got a global opacity just in case you want to reduce the effect, and this affects all the channels that Filther is applying to. You've got a balance, so you can scrub through that filth mask and change how it's being applied to the material below. Got a little contrast slider and a global blur in case you need to blur the effect. You can invert the filter, so this just inverts the mask that's being used. Enable custom mask is used if you want to be able to paint directly into the filter. We'll come back to that in a moment. As I said, here you can enable a custom filth, so I can choose some sort of custom filth like maybe the clouds, and all the same controls still work for whatever you plug into that custom filth option. Next up, we've got roughness control, so in case you want to adjust the roughness that's being applied to the filth, so I can make this like a wet effect. You've got a roughness opacity slider in case you want to blend it with the layer below, as well as a roughness mask spread. So you can see this starts to pull in or move out the mask for the roughness depending on this slider. This is handy if you want to have wetness seeping into the material around it but not affect the base color diffuse, or say if you just want the central parts of this blood to be wet but to be drying out towards the edges. You've also got a contrast slider just for changing the sharpness of that mask. Next we've got some normal control. If you enable normal, we now get some normal map information for our filth. You can choose the blend modes, so you can choose to either combine the normal map or replace. We'll come back to that in a moment. You can invert the normal that's being applied. Got an intensity slider as well as a softness in case you want to soften that normal. You've got a normal mask balance, so a bit like the roughness masks, we can expand and contract the mask that's been used to drive the normal map. So in case you just want blobs at the very center of the filth, as well as a normal mask contrast. So this flattens out the normal map that's been generated, or you've got more height variation. If we come back to our blend mode and look a bit closer what's happening here. Right now we're using the combine blend mode, so you can see that the normal information under here is just being combined with the normal information of the filth. If we switch that to replace, you'll see now that the normal map of the filth is overriding the normal map of the surface underneath. Once we switch to replace mode, we can adjust this replace bias. So all the way to the right means that the normals of the filth override everything below it. If you start to pull this to the left, it starts to introduce the normals of the surface underneath, and you go all the way to the left, it's pretty much the normals of the underneath surface showing through. This is handy for getting a little half blend between the normals below and above to simulate thickness in the filth. Next up, we've got a thickness slider, so if you bring it more to the right, it starts to blur the underlying normals, and this is great for simulating a slightly thicker filth. Next up, we've got some metallic control in case you need your filth to be metallic, which is handy for some metals. Next, we've got some blending control, so we can enable height mask blending. What this does is it uses the underlying material to drive a height mask. So this is great for even nicer blends with the surface below. So if I lower the contrast here a little bit, if I scrub through the height mask offset, you can see that it starts to mask how the filth is being applied. This would be great in this case for blood seeping out of a wound, for example. I can also invert that height mask. So before it was seeping out of the cracks, now it's sort of sitting on the surface. So this would be more good for lipstick or blood that's sort of transferred onto a surface. You can see it's just hitting the highest top edges. We've got a contrast slider in case you want to adjust how sharp or soft that effect is. You've got an overall opacity just in case you want to knock down the actual opacity of that height masking. And finally down the bottom you've got a relief balance. This adjusts how it's interpreting the underlying channel. So to the left it's bigger, softer shapes in the height mask, and to the right it's a really finely detailed interpretation of the channel. Speaking of channels, at the top here you've got the mask source channel. So right now I'm using the underlying normal map as my source channel for this height mask blending. So this will only work if your underlying material has a normal map. For example, if I switched back to height here, you can see I've lost my height mask blending because my underlying material hasn't got height map information. However, if I come down to my material here and turn off normal and turn on height, you'll see now it's using the height map instead of the normal map channel to drive the height mask. So if you're not seeing any height mask blending, just make sure you've got the correct mask source channel active. Finally, at the bottom, we've got some subsurface scattering control, and this is useful if you're using subsurface scattering. We can allow the filth to start to block some of the light being transferred through the material. So this is useful on fabrics and skin, where we're using a skin shader. We can start to influence the scattering map. We've also got a blur for that scattering just in case we want to simulate a slightly thicker material. So the influence on the scattering map is slightly blurred to simulate thickness. So the great thing and the powerful thing about everything that we've done so far is it all gets affected by these high level controls at the top. So if I quickly switch my filter type, you can see that all the settings that I've set so far are still applied to every kind of filth that I've got in this list. I can play with any of these filters, adjust the balance, and it's all still affected by how I've set up my filter to work. So I come down here, this is like blood dripping off the edge. If I wanted to feel like it's coming out of the cracks, just invert the height mask and play with the offset. So here is like a wound that's dried out, and you can slowly see maybe the blood slowly seeping through the cracks. Or play with my blending just to start to bring more of the blood through. So now I can switch again between all my filter masks, and I've got lots of instant variation. If I'm not happy with the positioning of the filth, I can just hit randomize and quickly get the look that I want. Yeah, that's more like it, and adjust the balance a little bit. So let's say I'm happy with this look, but I want to paint out a few little parts of the filth mask itself. To do this, I need to come to texture set settings and enable the user 1 channel. Filther uses the user 1 channel to be able to paint into the mask directly. The next thing I want to do is to add a paint layer. Make sure it's below the filter because filter needs to read this information, therefore it needs to sit above this paint layer. On the paint layer itself, come down and make sure it's using the user 1 channel and not any of the other ones. You don't want to be painting color or roughness. And maybe you want to paint these things, but for now we're just going to dry the mask. Next, I'm going to choose a quick brush to use. So maybe this heavy sponge. Finally, once you've added the paint layer, you need to come back into Filther and enable custom mask user 1. Just switch that to on. So now if I come back to my paint layer and just start painting, you can see I'm painting directly into the mask that's been used by Filther. So I can additively paint into it, just add more detail where I want it. So full white in the user 1 channel adds to Filther. Mid gray reveals the already created Filther look. So this just reveals the look that you'd made before. It doesn't take away or add, it just reveals the way the filter is set up already. And if I go to full black, I can start to actually remove parts of the filter. So I can just remove sections that I really don't want to see. Okay, I want to do that, and maybe I want a gap here. Come back to full white and, you know, draw a smiley face. I don't know, make him look very happy. And there we go. So now we can paint directly into the filter itself and remove any parts we don't want. The other great thing about Filther is it's just like any other normal layer. You can use all your favorite smart masks on the final effect. So if I come back to my shelf here and go to smart masks, I can drag any one of these on top of the filter effect. So this is moss from above, so now I'm only seeing the filth on the top. Or I can come down here and change it to surface worn, so I'm only seeing filth right on these outer edges, and I can play with the mask parameters for that. So now I'm just getting filth right on the outer edges. I don't want any in the cracks or in the ambient occlusion areas. So you can see you build up a very powerful way of texturing your assets, being able to sample the materials below and generate smart masks without having to use any sort of anchor points or anything. And finally use all of your normal smart masks to even further tweak the final look of Filther. If I come back to Filther, I'll come back to these presets that I showed you before at the top. If you want to just really quickly reset all your parameters to default, hit reset to default. It'll still obviously maintain any painted in layers that you've got. Also got a couple of easy to use presets like moss, so we can add some moss over the top of a surface, or grease. So now we've got like an oily grease sitting on the top of your mesh. Again, these are all still controlled by the balance settings. Got some drying mud sitting on your asset. Got some drying mud or wet blood. So those are the ones that I've created for now, but it's very simple to create more. The other great thing about Filther is it's using the direct information that's below the filter itself. So right now I'm using this skin, it's interpreting how it's going into the cracks of the skin. But if I was to change the skin, say, to a completely different material, for example this cotton square, and put that over the top, it's starting to use that material instead for masking how it looks. So it's completely dependent on the surface that you have below the filter itself. So here you're starting to see the blood appear in the cracks of this leather. So I can play with the height offset here, and you can see that it's properly using this underlying surface to drive its masking. You can also switch to something like a concrete. If you ever see Filther not being applied, it's probably because you've set Filther to accept a height map, but there's no height information. So just make sure you've got the correct information below for Filther to understand when it comes to height mask blending. So make sure this is set to normal because we activated the normal map. So now I can play with my offsets, and you can see that the blood is starting to sit in these little cracks here as opposed to on the top of the surface. I can now instance this filth effect across the whole model. Just keep in mind that currently when Substance creates an instance, it loses all of its layer blending properties. You notice that when you drag a filter on top, all the layers and all the channels are set to pass through so that it can affect the layers below. So if I'm to instance this across the texture sets, it's first of all, it's complaining that you haven't got a user 1 channel because in case you want to paint into it. For now, that doesn't really matter. So we're just going to instance it across. So right now it looks incorrect. It looks weird. If I come to my other texture set and click on Filther, you'll notice that the base color blending mode is set incorrectly. So I'll very quickly now run through all the layers and set them to pass through mode. Hopefully in future when Substance creates an instance, it also respects the layer blending modes. So you can see now my filters instance across the entire mesh. I can use triplanar projection just to fix some of the projection errors across the UVs. And I can drag a smart mask across the filter just to give it that final tweaking of the look, so I can affect where the filter is being applied. So I can tweak this mask how I like, increase the contrast. I can very quickly change my look, pressing a few buttons, adjust my balance. And maybe I decide, oh, that's the wrong kind of skin. Let's use the eyebrow skin. So you can see that filter adjusts depending on what's being fed into the base materials really nicely. So that's a very quick rundown of Filther. I hope you enjoy using it.